Hi, I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about resilience and how it benefits from having a community. I am presenting this material from my home here in Tejon Cache, BC, where I live, work, and play on the unceded traditional territories of the Simqua and Lheidli T'enneh peoples. Who am I, you might ask? Well, my name is Shirley Giroux, and I am the school counselor here in Valemount, where I work from all of our students from kindergarten through grade 12. So, resilience. What do we mean and why is it so important? Often when we talk about resilience or hear about resilience, it tends to be thought of as a list of traits like this one here that are meant to explain how people are able to keep going when they experience hardship. Although this list does show a list of personal traits, we can see that the bottom one here has to do with relationships. And this focus on relationships is going to be kind of our theme for this presentation. So when we talk about resilience, often it can be easy to think that it's something that a person can do on their own. So we've all heard the stories of people who were able to, overcome or tough it through. But when we look a little bit deeper into those stories, there is always some aspect of relationship, and usually a fairly significant aspect of relationship. As we can see on this list here from Unger, there are at least three things on this list that are directly to do with relationships, intimate intimate and sustaining relationships, lots of other relationships, so just a variety of relationships, and a sense of belonging. We also have at least these other three items that also more indirectly, but still definitely have to do with resilience. So being able to repair relationship, which is accepting consequences, um, and being able to take ownership of our identity and see how others might see us and how we might influence our world, as well as safety and support. So being able to build those safe spaces for people to come to us and for us to feel safe with other people. In general, if we imagine resilience to be this floating bar here in the middle of this model, um, we can see on the top, we have different factors that are going to be pressuring us in our lives. So these can be job stressors or family stressors or things outside of that. Maybe, you get a flat tire. So all of these different stressors, this is when we're going to see resilience in action. If we don't have stressors in our lives, we're not being resilient. We have no reason to have to use our resilience because it is only when we are working through an adverse situation that we see resilience. Underneath this floating bar of resilience, you can see that we have these protective factors. So we can have personal protective factors like we saw in that first list, things like self-efficacy and realistic optimism. And we also have environmental protective factors. So how much trust do you experience at work? How much autonomy do you have? How well regarded are you in your community? These can all be environmental protective factors. Where does relationship fit in this model, you might ask? Well, in the personal side, we need to be able to reach out and ask for support. In the environmental side, we also need to have access to that network for potential support. So it kind of fits in both. In my own research with self-identified women who were teaching and also had caring demands outside of their work environment, largely to do with their own children, but not entirely, I also found through the collection of stories of resilience from my research participants that once again, relationships came up a lot. So of the six themes within which all of the stories that were collected kind of grouped, the two of the categories had to do with relationships. So one was working with people. This was to do with work-related relationships, and the other was to do with family. Family came up so many times in my research that it got its very own category of resilience. So in some of these stories that were shared with me as part of that research, there were all sorts of different relationships that came up. So here we can see some work relationships with the school team, principal, friends and family, even students can be a source of resilience because often we do get a lot of joy and we get filled up by working with these students. Besides those relationships that might be kind of expected, work and home, we also saw some relationships that were more professional carers. So counseling came up for some people, in addition to friends and family and coworkers, and childcare, being able to rely on high quality, loving, caring professionals to take care of our children when we were at work, that was very, very highly important, as I'm sure you all know. One thing that came through very clearly in this work was that when we talk about balance, we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice. So often when we talk about balance, like we can see in the picture here, there's a fulcrum or a point that we're trying to keep everything else teetering on top of. If we don't have everything organized just so, the whole system falls apart. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't really know. I can't think of anyone who's got the time to do that. So instead of balance, I like the idea of what's called an equilibrium. So an equilibrium is another kind of system, you may have heard about it if you've taken chemistry, where instead of having everything arranged just so and needing to stay rather static, it's dynamic. Things are always moving, things are always changing. It recognizes that sometimes you might need to spend more time at home, sometimes you might need to spend more time on work, sometimes you might not be spending as much time on work or home because you're doing something completely different and maybe leisurely, which I hope you are. Um, I like to think about equilibrium, the difference between equilibrium and balance, as sort of the difference between sweatpants or buffet pants and work clothes. So sometimes, you're going to work and you're getting into your work clothes and things aren't quite fitting right. Maybe they're uncomfortable. You have to change pieces. You get home, you get out of those clothes. They're quite restrictive. You have to have things a certain way. And you get into your more comfortable, probably quite elastic clothing because you have more room for things to shift around. You have more roominess and it's a more realistic and gentle way for us to live. So just like sharing our messy houses with each other can really help people feel okay with being themselves and being their like not having to present a picture of perfection, so too can sharing stories of how we're experiencing our work. That can be very relationship building and validating. So the rest of this presentation is going to be about this idea of collective care. So we hear a lot about self-care, but really one of the things we need to be talking about is collective care, where we're taking care of each other. So when we talk about collective care, it's to do with seeing members' well-being. So colleagues, or maybe it's in an outside of work type of support group. It's to see the well-being of the members in the group, and particularly their emotional health, as a shared responsibility of the group rather than the lone task of an individual. And this fits in any kind of educational setting because when we're working as humans with other humans, caring for them, we're quite prone to burnout, where we are giving out for so long that we're sort of not necessarily getting enough back in to sustain ourselves. So when we talk about self-care, it's like we're telling people, hey, we know that your work is really challenging and that it's going to be quite draining. So even though these are features of your work that we all recognize, you need to go and take care of the repercussions of that on your own. I don't see that as being particularly fair. And I think that we all do better when we can work together and pull together through a collective care model. When we look at different relationships at work, there's even new research to suggest that different relationships are going to provide us with different kinds of support. So not only can we look at the importance of supportive relationships as a whole, but we can look at individual relationships to see, oh, what are the things that I'm getting from this relationship that are building me up? And even potentially go and look to fill gaps where we might not be having our needs met. And this can all be done through collective care, but you might be asking, how do we get people together? Well, I'm glad you asked. So there are so many reasons to get together. With the research that I did with BC teachers across BC, we met for dinner, sushi in a Starbucks in some cases, a Mexican restaurant in another case. Now that we have COVID, things are a little bit different, but there are still lots of things we can do to get together. So as long as we're observing our physical distancing guidelines, there are different things like picnics or getting together in a virtual sphere where we can play. There are some games that are available. Whatever the reason to get together, it's probably worth doing, especially if we can take the time to also make the space to share our stories with each other. Stories are a really important way for us to connect and help understand what each of us is going through, so that not only are we able to support our colleagues, but we know that they are able to see us for who we really are and give us the support that we need. So I mentioned before about messy houses, and sometimes, we look at pictures of what people post online and it looks like perfect lives, but then we go over to the house and, nobody has a perfect house. By being able to share the realities of our lives, again, we're able to shine some light on the fact that, hey, you know what? We're all human and we're all doing the best we can. We're also able to use those stories as a glue that's going to bring us together and bind us together a bit more, because we start to recognize each other as having more in common than maybe we first realized. We can also use story as web, where we can connect what we're going through to what other people are going through, and even to what other people in different parts of the world are going through. So we can use this as a way to connect our experiences with different experiences in different places. Involving emotion is also an important part of this work, because emotions are data. Emotions give us information that helps us make sense of our place in the world. So when we are able to recognize what our emotions are and share what's going on for us, we can better keep ourselves healthy. And especially when we're talking about burnout, help prevent us from succumbing to emotional exhaustion, where we've spent so much time suppressing or ignoring or trying to change emotions through brute force that they're just we are literally emotionally exhausted, which is one of the three aspects of burnout. So here in Valmont, I was able to take some of the learning from my initial research and actually do a group where we again met in person for dinner on a regular basis. And ahead of each dinner, we shared stories of how emotion was coming up for us in our work. So my initial stories were on resilience. With this group, we looked at stories of emotion in our teaching roles. So these stories came from all sorts of grades and covered all sorts of material. And I think there's probably a lot of overlap too from the ECE experiences. A lot of the stories ended up talking about feeling like we were on an emotional roller coaster, feeling pushed or pulled. We talked about positive emotion and emotion that's often seen to be as more negatively valenced. So defeated and guilty, but also proud and happy. And by sharing these stories together and on a regular basis, and also doing some fun things as a group, when we collected feedback at the end, it was clear that people did see some value in this. So they found that they were more easily able to approach colleagues. We felt like we knew each other better, and we saw that we're all having the same experiences. Often some of the stories you couldn't tell if they were coming from a kindergarten class or a senior science class, because the emotional experience is so similar. People also people also saw some value in this work and in taking it forward. So the fact that they were invitation only, you were never forced to share, it was always by invitation, that was very important. And that we were able to take the work that we were doing together and find some common themes that we're now hoping to use, to change the way we're working even a little bit more. So no matter how we talk about getting together in these collective ways and trying to work together to sustain ourselves, as we can see here by this list, we want to make sure that we have, again, these different aspects of relationship. So on here, you can see that about 5 out of the 13, again, have something directly to do with relationships. 8 out of 13, if you count the boundaries, conflict, and closure, which also have to do with interactions. So I hope through this brief presentation, you've been able to, you will agree that it is hard and it's normal to struggle with multiple caregiving demands, whether it's teaching and then coming home to your own children, or working in another care role and then coming home to take care of a parent, or just worrying about your friends. This all takes a toll on us emotionally. And it's by getting together that we're able to support each other in meaningful ways and really be resilient when we encounter adverse conditions. I'm just going to finish off with this little poem here, and I'm not going to read it, but I expect that the PowerPoint slides will be available to you. And this poem is just a really nice reminder, I find, that we don't need one more thing. We don't need one more curriculum or one more book, although I don't know that you can have too many books. But what we really need, beside, instead of these fancy programs, is the time and space to spend some time together. So just like when we're building a fire, we want to put the logs with space between them so that it can grow. So too, do we need to have the time and space to spend together in supported yet meaningful ways, not just crammed together to be together, so that we can support each other through collective care. So I have also included a few resources here that'll refer to some of the things that you saw on these slides. And thank you very much. If you have any comments or questions, I would love to hear from you. My email is below. Thank you.